Ruth prepared the soup with some ingredients she managed to buy cheaper. With the scattered notes throughout the house, she tried not to get disappointed, thinking that she would soon be paid for the work she had done for a week cleaning the neighbor's house. I don't need to get upset. They will pay me soon, and along with the subsidized food, I'll be able to eat better for a few days, she thought. Don Francisco sunbathed in the small patio of the house, surrounded by his beloved plants. The old man couldn't move as well as he did a few years ago, so he helped himself with a cane and was almost always sitting or lying somewhere in the section. She was a very poor girl who decided to leave home because she couldn't bear her mother's mistreatment. But like any decision made without planning, Ruth found herself alone on the dangerous streets, with just a backpack on her back and practically no money. Walking aimlessly, she saw an old dilapidated house that clearly needed repairs. A dirty piece of paper hanging in the windows could barely be read, "Rooms for rent." The wooden door was closed, and Ruth wondered whether to knock or not. But in that situation, she couldn't be picky. Any place would do as long as it had a bed. She gathered her courage and knocked on the door. A minute passed, and she knocked again, but nothing was heard. She knocked for several minutes, but no one seemed to live there. She sighed in defeat, thinking it was an older ad than she thought. She was about to leave when the old iron bolts moved and creaked. "How can I help you?" The man who came out to meet her was an old man who looked neglected. His clothes were dirty, and he himself seemed like he hadn't bathed in a few days. His beard was very long, as was his hair, and his hands were wrinkled and stained with something like clay. "Ruth, I was scared at first, but I didn't know if I would find another place to spend the night." "Good evening, sir," she said with a trembling voice. "I saw on your sign that you were renting rooms. I wanted to know if I could rent one for tonight, at most." "Of course I can," the old man replied with great joy. "Come in, my daughter. You are home." The man went inside, and Ruth, anxious and afraid, was prepared to run if that gentleman tried anything strange. The house was especially in need of lighting. Some modifications had been made, but it still retained the classic style of the past century. "My name is Francisco, and I have lived in this house all my life because it is a family inheritance. I'm renting out rooms to have money to eat," he explained. They reached a large and somewhat dusty room. It seemed to have belonged to a young person. It had a single bed, a TV, and an old dresser. "I got this room for my oldest son. I tried to keep it clean, but people always refuse to stay here because of the dust and humidity. I'm older, and sometimes I have trouble cleaning. This house is too big." Ruth made up words that were very few. She decided to ignore her common sense that told her to run away from that place and said to the old man, "For me, it's great, at least the sheets on the bed. How much do you charge me?" Don Francisco thought for a moment and shrugged, saying, "I don't know, my daughter. Whatever you can give me, I accept. I've been trying to rent these rooms for months, and people always get upset when I say any price. Give me what comes from your heart." The girl couldn't help but smile at the pity that humble response gave her. She found some crumpled notes in her backpack and gave him some, saying, "I'll stay here a few more nights until I find a job." "That's great," Francisco replied happily. "But if you're looking for a job, there's one that might interest you." Curious, she looked at that old man as if he were a saving angel. Getting a roof and a job on the first night away from home was much more than she could imagine. "As you can see, I'm a lonely old man in a house too big. My eyes fail, and I can hardly move without my cane. I spent many months asking my children to hire a nurse for me, but they didn't listen to me. All they do is send me money when they remember me. Well, what do you think about working for me? All you need to do is clean the house a bit and cook. I'm sure a healthy young girl can do that without any problem. I would pay you, but I can't offer you much." Although Ruth tried to contain her joy, it immediately appeared. It was exactly what she used to do at home, only now she could charge for it. Coexistence at first was a bit rough. Ruth didn't know exactly where to start cleaning such a large house, so she started with the kitchen, as it was where she spent most of her time. There were many pots, dishes, jars, utensils, glasses, and other broken and useless kitchen utensils, or they were just plastic containers, butter, or yogurt that now, when washed, got dirty and were the layers of insects. In the refrigerator, it was full of rotten and very dirty food. She decided to remove everything that wasn't working and do a complete cleaning. The old man sighed to the heavens when the girl started putting objects that, in his view, were in perfect condition in large black bags. "No, What are you doing, girl? Everything here works. Mr. Francisco was confused. This kitchen is uninhabitable. I have to clean it to be able to be afraid of getting something. The fights were not limited only to that part of the kitchen. There were also many areas of the house that needed cleaning, and every time Dom Francisco and Ruth had various discussions. However, no matter how much they argued and yelled at each other, the old man never seriously offended or threatened to hit her. This made a big difference to the girl because that's how she was used to at home. Ruth began to notice other things in that strange routine. One of them was that throughout the first week she lived there, the old man didn't receive a single call from his children, not even any kind of message. But every time she wanted to throw away some old belongings, those men, Dom Francisco tried to stop her tooth and nail. No, Ruth, don't do that. Maybe I need it at some point. The girl simply remained silent and tried to put it in a box as neatly as possible. She wanted to know why those who are called beloved children took so long to call the old father who missed them so much. But it's also that Dom Francisco didn't call either. When Ruth had the courage to ask him, he replied sadly, I think it's better to wait for them to call me. They're very busy, you know, and maybe it's not a good idea to bother them with my call. I understand. Ruth preferred not to continue asking because she didn't want to provoke feelings of sadness that made her boss feel bad. After a month of work, Ruth received her first paycheck as the old man had promised. It wasn't a spectacular amount, but it was much more than Ruth could save to leave home. At the time, she didn't have big ambitions, and despite it being her first month in which she spent a lot of time cleaning and organizing, she was enjoying her independence. She decided to stay and work for him, the friendly old man, until he found another job. In the afternoons, she accompanied Dom Francisco to a senior center where the grandparents watched television, played board games, read in the company of others, and in general, talked and made friends. Ruth noticed like a child that many elderly people avoided talking to Dom Francisco for a long time. She thought it was probably because of his appearance, so she decided to remedy that unhappy situation. On a good Saturday morning, after breakfast, Dom Francisco, it's time to shave. Go wash yourself while I prepare everything and put a load of your clothes in the washing machine. It seems like you haven't had clean clothes for a long time, old man. I tried to protest, but to no avail. The girl's insistence was proof of everything. As the girl cut his hair and beard, she was surprised by what she found, a very old but dignified face hidden under all that beard and tangled hair. That afternoon, Dom Francisco was different, with short hair, no beard, and clean clothes. Many acquaintances didn't recognize him and went to greet him. Some couldn't hide their shock when the old man said who he was. Mr. Francisco, you look different. Why the change? Well, I owe it to my new friend. She cleaned my house from top to bottom and helps me every day with the food. Some wondered if that girl was his granddaughter or maybe something else, but Dom Francisco laughed to tell them that she was just a friend's daughter who came to spend a few days in that town. That same afternoon, many people spoke to Ruth, asking if she would be interested in going to their homes to help with the cleaning as well. Ruth was happy to be able to get some kind of benefit from the basic skills she learned at home. Soon, the girl was working in 3 houses, and the income improved considerably. If she wanted, she could rent elsewhere, but she got used to the warm company that Dom Francisco gave her. One day, Dom Francisco asked her to accompany him to a place. Ruth, if you don't work today, could you accompany me somewhere? Taking that shopping cart and the big cloth bag, the girl was very surprised by this attitude, but it seemed that she was going to the market, even though she had already bought the groceries for the house. What's going on? She said to herself. The road seemed long, but Ruth was happy to see other parts of the city. Finally, after a long bus ride, they arrived at what seemed to be a government office. Ruth, Dom Francisco entered an office with other elderly people accompanied by younger people. After a while, one by one, they passed and left with bags full of groceries. What is this, Francisco? Why are they giving us food? Sorry I didn't tell you before. It's that I'm a retired teacher, and the government gives me a box of groceries every 2 months. It's not always the same, but it's a good help for single people like me. The girl was surprised by this revelation and began to ask. I painted pictures and murals on commission in rich people's houses. When that didn't sustain me anymore, I started teaching at the same school where you studied. It seems that almost all of us ended up teaching there when I was young. I was very frustrated, but now that I'm old, I'm grateful for at least this help, Ruth. Dom Francisco supported her, talking about art and paintings. The young woman couldn't stop being impressed by everything her boss told her, and her respect for him grew with each new story of painters he revealed. For months, everything seemed to be going very well. Dom Francisco paid her punctually at the end of each month, and often there was a generously given tip. But there came a time when he could no longer pay her. It was very difficult for the old man to be honest with himself or even with the girl. My dear Ruth, I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but unfortunately, I have no more money. My children stopped sending me allowances long before you arrived, but I was sure they would send me more at any moment. I'm very sorry to have to ask you to leave. I can't afford to pay you anymore. Ruth tried to contain her expression of surprise and concern, took the poor old man's hands that were crying with sadness, and said to him, Dom Francisco, don't worry about the money. I can continue taking care of you and the house without receiving payment. I'll find another way to make money. The truth is that Ruth wasn't doing well cleaning houses either. Money was tight, and in the houses she frequented, people simply weren't interested in her cleaning service. On a sunny Saturday, Ruth was trying to calm her nerves while cooking. She tried to think of other ways to serve, like saving as much food as possible from the government. When she went out to the patio with the food tray, Dom Francisco was sleeping in the garden chair. She tried to wake him up, but he didn't react. She tried harder and called his name, but it was impossible for him to wake up. A terrible thought crossed her mind, and she was afraid. But that's how Dom Francisco died, in the middle of his beloved garden that he took such good care of. A long and stormy process began immediately. Ruth was detained for a few days at the police station until it was verified that she had nothing to do with the old man's death. The police told her that they tried to contact his children, but they showed no interest. They only asked about the inheritance and the house papers. However, Dom Francisco had left her a cassette tape recorded with her name on it. The police sent her home to listen to his last message. Ruth, my dear, I'm sorry for not being able to pay you in the last few months. I know that an old man's apologies don't mean much, and I don't know when you'll hear this message, but I want you to know that when I die, I'll pay you what I owe you. The money will be automatically transferred to your account. I've already arranged everything with my lawyer. After finishing listening to the message, Ruth cried inconsolably for the loss of the first person who had offered her sincere love. Released by the police, the girl ran to the nearest bank. She really needed that money. She imagined it was some effort on the old man's part to repay her. I really need this money, she said, composing herself, wiping away the tears, and thinking that she should look for another rental soon because surely those heartless children who abandoned their father had already succeeded to the inheritance. When it was finally her turn, the girl took out her wallet and said, I want to withdraw all the money in my account. The young man started working on the small computer when his expression changed. He looked at the screen for a few seconds and said, I'm sorry, miss, but I think you'll have to speak to the manager. With the boy, he left his post and accompanied Ruth to the manager's office. They waited a few moments before entering. Finally, the boy explained the situation to the boss. Together, they analyzed the data that the system returned. A few seconds later, the manager rose from his chair and replied, Miss, sorry for the inconvenience, but we can't handle what you're asking for. Ruth lowered her head sadly, thinking that she had been deceived by believing the word of an old man who was broke. This happens to me for believing in the word of an old man who was broke. And it was true that she really counted on that money because Dom Francisco had told her that he would pay her as soon as he received the money he was owed. She murmured a brief thank you and was about to leave when the clerk said to her, It seems you didn't understand what we're trying to tell you. There's money in your account. The problem is that it's too much. Ruth looked at him confused. Then the manager said, It's too much to make a single withdrawal. Check for yourself. Ruth moved away from the screen, and there, she could see the largest figure she had ever seen in her life. Apparently, the friendly manager continued, A massive transfer was made from an insurance company. Perhaps a relative of yours has died. It clearly says here that the funds were transferred to you as the sole responsible family member of Francisco Guzmio's family by Magisterio Seguros. Do you know anything about this? The manager asked his questions. Ruth was stunned and speechless. She fell to the floor sobbing. She couldn't believe the blessing she had received, that old man who was more than her boss, was a loving grandfather who helped her in the late afternoon. In a beautiful hotel room, Ruth saw that a cassette tape contained a message on the other side. She found a radio at the reception, but there were no more of that kind. And it's that Dom Francisco was outdated in technology. She then managed to get a radio that played that cassette tape in an antique store and sat down to listen to the other part of the message. "My dear, forgive me for recording this in this way, but the last thing I wanted to say is that I was saving that money for my children. But after living these few months, it seems to me that it's really worth it. You have been like a daughter to me, and I feel that you did everything with heart and genuine care. I just want you to know that you have given me indescribable happiness by staying with me. You not only fixed up my old house, but also brought joy to my heart in my last days. I'm giving you my blessing, and I hope God accompanies you on your journey, wherever you go." Months later, Ruth managed to buy her old boss's house. It wasn't easy at all because the old man's affectionate children fought like vultures. But finally, the young woman managed to have it in her name and decided to refurbish it to found a home for abandoned elderly people, which she affectionately named after Dom Francisco. Friends, what an incredible and touching story, don't you think? I hope you understand the lesson this story leaves us. It's moving and deserves to be shared. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. See you soon with more stories like this. Big hug and God bless you.